We grow up believing that intelligence is the greatest gift, that if you're sharp enough, insightful enough, articulate enough, doors will open, people will listen, the world will understand you. But what if that belief is a lie? What if intelligence, especially when used raw and unfiltered, doesn't liberate you, but isolates you? Arthur Schopenhauer believed exactly that. In his characteristically brutal clarity, he argued that the mind that sees too clearly becomes a threat, not because it is wrong, but because it shines a light most people are not ready to stand in. For him, intelligence was not a badge to wear proudly, but a sword to be sheathed carefully, lest you cut the very people you're trying to connect with. If you've ever found yourself in a room where every word had to be measured, where truth, however softly spoken, made others flinch, you already know what this means. It's not that you're wrong, it's that you're right too quickly, too clearly, too unapologetically. And in a world where self-image is currency, being right can feel like a personal attack. Psychology has long confirmed what Schopenhauer intuited. Social comparison theory, proposed by Leon Festinger, showed that we don't evaluate ourselves in a vacuum. We judge our abilities and value relative to others. And when someone enters a space with superior insight, nuance, or clarity, they unintentionally disrupt the psychological balance. They don't have to insult anyone. Just existing is enough. This is where intelligence becomes a curse. It doesn't fail you in reasoning. It fails you in belonging. Because many people don't seek clarity. They seek comfort. They don't want to be challenged. They want to be confirmed. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to notice contradictions, to see the hidden flaws in logic, to correct what others leave unquestioned. But pointing that out, even gently, can be experienced as violence to someone's ego. So what happens? You start shrinking. You learn to hold back your tongue. You edit your thoughts mid-sentence. You stop offering insights unless invited. And even then, you hesitate. You watch people nod along to mediocrity, and you learn the secret language of silence. Not because you're ashamed of your intelligence, but because you're tired of being punished for it. Schopenhauer saw this pattern clearly. He understood that society, for all its talk about progress, favors comfort over truth and favors the familiar over the exceptional. The average mind seeks harmony, not disruption, and raw intelligence disrupts. A clever argument, however elegant, wounds pride. A well-timed correction exposes insecurity. Even honesty can be received as arrogance when it threatens someone's self-concept. It's no wonder that many highly intelligent people report feeling alone, misread, or emotionally exhausted. Not because they lack empathy, but because they carry a burden of awareness, a burden that cannot always be shared. In clinical settings, we see this often in patients with high verbal IQs and low emotional support systems. They can articulate their inner world beautifully, but are met with confusion or even rejection when they try to connect. Their intelligence, rather than building bridges, erects walls. The clarity they bring becomes alienating. The more precisely they describe a shared human experience, the less relatable they seem. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said that the fool holds an advantage over the wise, not because he sees more, but because he fits better into a world that rewards ease, not insight. And he was not glorifying ignorance. He was warning the intelligent. Your mind may be sharp, but your survival depends on your social calibration. So where does that leave you? The quiet observer, the sensitive analyst, the one who sees too much and speaks too little? It leaves you with a choice. You can continue speaking the unfiltered truth, correcting, clarifying, confronting, bleeding others with every insight. Or you can begin to see intelligence not as a weapon to brandish, but as a tool to be shaped. Because wisdom, unlike mere intellect, knows when not to use itself. This isn't about playing dumb. It's about choosing subtlety over spectacle, strategy over ego, connection over conquest. And if that sounds like betrayal, consider this. A sword kept in its sheath is not weaker. It is simply more dangerous. Once you realize that raw intelligence can be alienating, the next question isn't how to make yourself less intelligent, but how to make your intelligence survivable. This is where Schopenhauer introduces an idea that at first sounds like an insult to the soul. Pretend to be a fool. Not because you are one, but because there are times when appearing less is actually the key to having more. More influence, more freedom, more power, And this is not about playing dumb. It's about learning to move wisely in a world that rewards emotional safety over intellectual accuracy. Because here's the brutal truth no one wants to admit. Most people would rather feel right than be right. They will choose comfort over clarity, agreement over growth, ego over truth. And if your presence constantly threatens that delicate balance, they will push you out. Not because you are wrong, but because you are disrupting the story they live inside of. Pretending to be stupid, then, is not weakness. It's social jujitsu. You allow others to believe the victory was theirs. You resist the urge to correct, not out of cowardice, but out of control. You let them walk away thinking they figured it out themselves, when you were the one placing the breadcrumbs all along. There's a term in psychology for this: strategic self-presentation. It's the art of shaping how others see you, not through manipulation, but through intentional restraint. You choose to underplay your intelligence in order to build trust, to lower defenses, to position yourself as a mirror rather than a spotlight. Why? Because mirrors get invited in, spotlights get avoided. Think about it. Have you ever corrected someone gently, logically, only to be met with defensiveness or silence? That's not about the truth. That's about threat. The moment someone feels intellectually exposed, their ego builds a wall. They stop listening. They start defending. And in that moment, your truth is lost. So what do? You disarm them. You step back. You let them underestimate you. You let them win small so you can win big. You smile when you could correct. You nod when you could challenge. You play the fool, not because you're weak, but because you know the real power is in knowing when not to swing the sword. It's the same strategy used by some of the greatest minds in history. Leonardo da Vinci, who often veiled his radical ideas behind sketches and riddles. Nikola Tesla, whose eccentric silence hid years of innovation. Even Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, teaches that when able, appear unable, when near, appear far. The wise do not show all their cards. The wise know that discretion is not just safety, it's leverage. In social settings, this might look like holding back in a debate to preserve a relationship. In the workplace, it might mean letting your boss think an idea was theirs. In family life, it may be listening quietly while someone rants, knowing that correcting them will do more harm than good. In all of these cases, you are not surrendering intelligence, you are weaponizing it with restraint. Because here's the paradox. The smarter you are, the more skillfully you must hide it. Not forever, not in all things, but in the moments where being visibly correct creates invisible resistance. Even neuroscience supports this. The human brain is wired to protect the self-image. When people feel intellectually outmatched, it activates the amygdala, the same part of the brain that handles fear and survival. They don't feel challenged, they feel attacked. And when someone feels attacked, they can't listen, they can't grow, they only defend. So if you truly want to influence someone, you don't come at them with your sharpest blade. You come with open hands. You make them feel safe first. This is what pretending to be stupid really means. Not dumbing yourself down, but suppressing the need to be right in order to be effective. And in that suppression, something powerful is born: emotional intelligence. Because emotional intelligence isn't about knowing what others feel. It's about knowing what your truth costs, and when the price is too high, choosing to wait, to listen, to time your truth like a patient archer waiting for the wind to still. Let's be clear. This is not passivity. This is not playing small. This is strategy. It's knowing that you don't need to win every conversation because you're playing a longer game, a smarter one. One where people come to your side, not because you convinced them, but because they think they arrived there on their own. In a world addicted to attention, to noise, to constant self-branding, there is something radical, almost subversive, about the person who can listen more than they speak, who can see the truth and hold it quietly, who can choose not to dominate every room they enter. That kind of power isn't loud, it isn't obvious, but when it moves, the world bends. By now, we understand that displaying raw intelligence often triggers resistance, envy, or isolation. But what happens when we take that one step further? Not just holding back brilliance, but strategically vanishing from the stage altogether? This is where the true masters live, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, not as performers, but as quiet architects of outcomes. Schopenhauer only hinted at it. Others, like Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, and even modern behavioral economists, have expanded it. The most powerful person in the room is often the one no one sees coming. Because here's the secret they never teach in school. The world doesn't reward intelligence, it rewards perceived harmlessness. And the more brilliant you appear, the more threatening you become. But if you can master invisibility, if you can learn to lower your profile, soften your presence, delay your insights, you unlock a hidden advantage: freedom from attention. And attention, contrary to modern culture, is not always a blessing. It invites scrutiny, it creates pressure, it builds expectations that often become cages. But invisibility, that is liberation. When no one expects you to lead, you're free to choose when you do. When no one fears your ideas, you can insert them without friction. When no one sees you coming, they can't prepare defenses. In psychology, this is known as the low-profile effect. People who underplay their dominance, status, or intellect often achieve more influence precisely because they do not activate others' egos. They are non-threatening. They pass under the radar of insecurity. And while others are busy performing, defending, or posturing, the invisible ones are observing, gathering, positioning, waiting. This is the art of silent power. Not power you boast about, but power you build, slowly, quietly, intentionally. It's the executive who rarely speaks in meetings, but asks one question that changes the entire strategy. It's the quiet friend who notices everything and says little, but when they speak, the room goes still. It's the strategist who lets others claim credit for ideas, all while orchestrating the direction from behind. And why does it work? Because in human dynamics, control belongs to the person who shapes perception. And if you can control how others perceive you, you can influence what they expect of you, or fail to expect. And from that space of underestimation, you move with total autonomy. We often think of invisibility as weakness, as fading, as being small. But that's only because we've been taught to equate power with noise. Real power doesn't need validation. It doesn't seek applause. It moves the room without entering it. And let's be clear, invisibility doesn't mean irrelevance. It means timing. It means choosing when to reveal yourself. It means being invisible until your influence is inevitable. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's real. We see it in nature all the time. The tiger doesn't roar before it strikes. The snake doesn't hiss before it bites. The hawk doesn't announce its presence before diving. The greatest forces in the world are often the quietest: wind, gravity, time. They don't scream, but they shape mountains. So how do you practice this? How do you build strategic invisibility into your everyday life? You observe more than you speak. You ask more than you argue. You withdraw just before you win the point. You let others talk themselves into your position. You leave behind the need to be recognized and replace it with the need to be effective. And you begin to track not just the content of conversations, but the power flows within them. Who's seeking validation? Who's trying too hard? Who's afraid of looking wrong? You learn the landscape. You memorize the terrain. And then, when no one is watching, you start planting seeds. Ideas drop gently. Suggestions posed as questions. Confidence disguised as curiosity. All invisible. All deliberate. And when the time comes, when the room is ready, when the energy is calm, when the resistance is low, you reveal just enough of your vision to move things forward. Nothing more. This is the art of influence without resistance. And it belongs to those who master the restraint to wait, the courage to hold back, and the vision to move only when the moment is right. So yes, you may be brilliant, insightful, ahead of your time. But true power isn't about being seen. It's about being undeniable, whether or not anyone ever gives you credit. Because when you're invisible, no one sees your weapons. And that makes you untouchable. There's a moment, after you've learned to observe quietly, to hold your tongue, to restrain your sharpest truths, when a question begins to rise. If I'm always hiding, do I ever really matter? This is the trap that swallows many brilliant people. They begin to confuse invisibility with insignificance, subtlety with submission. But what they miss, what the true masters always understood, is that the most powerful move is not the loudest one. It's the one you already made, long before anyone noticed. And by the time they look up, the game has already changed in your favor. Because here's the final evolution of this strategy. You no longer just survive the world, You begin to shape it, quietly, precisely, permanently. How? Not by convincing people, not by correcting them, but by designing the frame they think inside of. This is called perception control, and it's not manipulation in the vulgar sense. It's architecture. Every conversation becomes a soft steering of attention. Every word is chosen to invite agreement without triggering ego. Every presence is calibrated to feel safe, disarming, unthreatening, and yet unforgettable. You don't demand to be right. You allow others to arrive at the right conclusion, your conclusion, on their own. You don't argue. You plant doubt. You don't instruct. You ask questions that unlock doors they didn't know existed. And that's the trick. People never resist what they believe was their own idea. This is where philosophy meets psychology, where Schopenhauer's cynicism meets Carl Jung's depth, where strategic silence meets human design. Because human beings are story-driven creatures. We don't live in reality. We live in our narrative about reality. And the person who subtly shapes that narrative, not with force, but with precision, holds the true scepter of power. You're not just pretending to be stupid anymore. You're not just hiding your light to avoid envy. Now you are wielding invisibility like a scalpel, cutting through resistance without ever drawing blood. This is high-level influence. It doesn't fight for control. It becomes the invisible axis around which the world begins to turn. But make no mistake, this path is not for everyone. It requires the kind of ego death most people never reach. The humility to let go of credit, the patience to watch others win battles while you win the war, the maturity to speak only when the silence has already done the work. And it demands one more thing, something deeper than tactics or strategy. It demands that you no longer need to prove who you are, that you are finally free from the need to be the smartest one in the room, free from the urge to be recognized, applauded, admired. Because only then, only when you no longer need the power, are you truly ready to wield it. Only then can you become what the world never sees coming, the quiet mind behind the movement, the hidden hand that resets the board, the wise fool who knew everything, said little, and changed everything. That is the final move. Not dominance, not victory, but subtle, sustained, unshakable influence. And once you've mastered it, you'll never again need to raise your voice. You'll never again need to be understood. You'll simply move in silence, and the world will follow. So if you've ever felt out of place because you think too deeply, speak too clearly, or see too far ahead, know this. You don't need to be less. You just need to be quieter and wiser about when to show your cards. Because intelligence is not about knowing more. It's about knowing when to be seen and when to disappear, so the world can finally catch up.